Hello and salam. Welcome to Muslim Viewpoint, a new podcast series powered by American Muslim Today, a groundbreaking non-profit digital newspaper who champions civic engagement. AMT informs and empowers the diverse voices of almost 30 million Muslims here in the US and other countries. I'm Rifat Malik. I'm AMT's editor-in-chief, and today we have an interview with Craig Hunter, who's a Presbyterian pastor from North Texas, and he talks to us about how he rallied his church to adopt a resolution calling Israel an apartheid state. Next weekend, on January the 19th and 20th, the Trinity Presbyterian Church in Denton is hosting its 11th annual Palestine Film Festival, followed by conversation and a free Palestinian dinner. He spoke earlier to our reporter, Maya Gaylor.
I facilitated and led a couple groups to Palestine and Israel in the early 2010s. That included the majority were from the congregation, and I had taught classes here at the church about the history of the Israeli-Palestinian situation, and then I'd also taught some classes at it used to be the Emeritus College at UNT, and now it's called OLLI, the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute. And so I led a couple groups over there, and we met with different individuals and organizations that were working on issues of justice and peace. And so then following the second of those trips, which was in 2012, some of the people from this church who had been on one or both of those trips, we decided to start meeting and thinking about what we could do. And so I think we settled relatively early on the idea of showing films because we thought that engages people sometimes in a less heady way, and there are images and stories, and so we had our first film festival in January of I guess it was 2013 or 2014. And every year since then, yeah, I mean, basically, we want to educate people about what is going on over there, and also communicate. I think that particularly some of the Palestinian community and others that feel isolated, that they're not alone. That there are others here who are aware and who care and are trying to do something about the situation and the relationship of this country to that area over there. So,
so I just had a little question. You guys, the church, you have passed a resolution calling Israel, what they're doing in apartheid, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Yeah, and then I'm sure, as you know, South Africa is filing a motion with along this. So can you just kind of tell me, what do you think about that, and why is it so important to call this issue an apartheid?
I lived there over 20 years ago, and it became clear living there then that this was not just some, minor injustice going on. It was a deep-rooted systemic issue that really kind of blew my mind when I lived there for a year. And so I'm part of a network of other Presbyterians in my denomination who are scattered around the country, and they've done most of the work in the denomination on this issue. I've been a part of it, so I've certainly helped, but there's been more others than me. But in I think it was in 2014, or this group, this network within the Presbyterian denomination, we wanted to change some of the policy of the denomination, and so we had one of the pushes that year was to divest from Hewlett Packard, Motorola Solutions, and Caterpillar, and then there was another one about naming the practices of Israel apartheid. And so both of those were introduced in 2014, and I introduced them both here in at my congregation and in North Texas. And in North Texas, among the Presbyterian, the way our without going into too many details, the divestment one lost here in this presbytery, but the apartheid one passed in this presbytery, which was a surprise to me. I did not think it was going to pass. So that meant it went to the national denomination, and in the national denomination in 2014, the apartheid one, the committee that looked at it in the denomination recommended against the apartheid one by a 33-32 vote, and then it lost by a bigger vote. And so it was defeated in 2014, but the divestment one passed. And so that was a big deal. It made the front page of the New York Times in 2014. So then in the fall of 2019, with this others in this network, I said, well, let's try again with the apartheid one, because it had failed, but it was close, and things had continued to deteriorate over there. And so I worked with one or two others on rewriting and revising the earlier draft. And so I introduced it here. And the way the Presbyterian system works, it has to kind of move up the chain. And so it passed here in this congregation, and then it passed in the Presbytery, which is the regional governing body in North Texas. It passed surprisingly like a 98-33 vote here in North Texas, which was a surprise. And then it was supposed to be voted upon in 2020, but then the pandemic hit, and so all the business of the national church got tabled, and then it got postponed until 2022. And in the meantime, between 2020 and 2022, Human Rights Watch, B'Tselem, Amnesty International, these other groups were coming out with these well-documented. I mean, our resolution was like 12 pages, and it had quotes and documented statistics, but these other organizations had come out and said, yes, this meets the definition of apartheid, and then so when it went before the denomination finally in 2022, it passed by about a 2-1 margin, which once again, I was pleasantly surprised that it passed. And the issue is, I mean, I'm sure, I think especially in the church, but even outside the church, you have to call things what they are. And so to say that it's apartheid is not necessarily in and of itself, it's not meant as a slur. It's meant as a fact. It's meant as an accurate description of this. This is what the international definition of apartheid is. It does not look exactly the way that South African apartheid did. It doesn't have to, according to the definition. So, but it still meets that definition. And so the denomination, agreed. And so now that's the policy of the denomination. And, I don't think it's an accident that South Africa is bringing this, this case against Israel, and that other peoples around the world, including in this country, Black Lives Matter movements, and people see, rightly so, that this is a kind of colonial, ethno or supremacist movement, and we have a history of that here in this country. And maybe that's part of what makes it difficult for us to recognize it elsewhere too, is we don't want to admit it in our own background. But I think it's significant that both South African government and also the South African church, the South African church has also pushed in the worldwide church before the last few months. What is going on in Israel is horrible. And actually, when the 2014 apartheid resolution went to the National Assembly here, I used some contacts to get Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who was still living, to personally endorse that resolution that passed, and to say, he had a blurb that we tried to publicize, and it said, I encourage the Presbyterians to vote in favor of this resolution, and I know what apartheid is, and So unfortunately, it didn't pass in 2014, but it did finally pass in 2022. Of course, he passed in between, but
Yeah. And then obviously this conflict has been going on for decades, more than 70 years. Um, but it's just now gaining real global support after the October 7th Hamas attack. So if you could kind of just tell me, how do you feel about that attack from Hamas? And then how do you feel about those who don't condemn those actions?
well, I mean, I think the Hamas's attack was a horrible thing. Um, but I um, that in a vacuum. I mean, the UN Secretary General said this hasn't occurred in a vacuum, and so and I think that's been a lot of the problem among the Western governments and even the Western Church is it's as if they want to kind of start the clock on October 7th and forget everything that happened before. And not only were there have there been a number of lies about what happened on October 7th. Although what did happen was horrible enough, but you have this entire history of ethnic cleansing, of apartheid, of various massacres, and so that the violence of the weak against the strong is not of the same moral quality as the violence of the strong against the weak. And so, and I think it's an imperfect but a helpful guideline is international law. And so, if Hamas goes and shoots a bunch of civilians, that's a violation of international law. And I think it should be said that is wrong. But at the same time, building the wall in the West Bank is a clear violation according to the International Court of Justice of international law. The system of control and oppression, the settlements, all and then the incessant bombing of Gaza, both in the past and especially in the last few months, all that's a violation of international law. So, I think that's a decent standpoint to start from is, what's the history? What's international law say? Although, I don't think international law has served Palestinians all that well historically, but I still think it could be and can be a helpful tool. The problem is the powers that be, mainly the United States government, is giving Israel close to a carte blanche to do whatever they want. So, but I mean, I do think this is bringing a lot of attention. I am, it's a mixed bag because on the one hand, it's just absolutely horrible and just unbelievable what's going on. On the other hand, I hope that there are more people who are like, this is just completely insane and wrong. And I hope more people are kind of tuning into that. And I certainly think that's the case among younger people, which is great. So that's hopeful, I think.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And then, as you mentioned, our US government is backing a lot of Israel's military. So how, as Americans, do we speak up? How do we protest? What do we do as civilians?
Well, I mean, I think that's an excellent question, and I think part of the answer, you have to do something. I mean, doing nothing is not an option, and so but I also think trying to be effective in what you do matters. So I and the group, we've been long supporters of the BDS movement. I think that's a nonviolent way of exerting pressure that has been falsely tarred as anti-Semitic, or but I think so. I'm a supporter of that. and then, pressuring various bodies, like in my case, it's the church, pressuring the church. And that was, to be clear, I was part of a much in my denomination, part of a much bigger group, and they did most of the work. But it was the work of many people over many years, and South Africa took the work of civil society. I mean, I think the U.S. government was supporting the South African apartheid government for a long time, and it really, I think, was civil society and the churches, and these days, it may not just be the churches, but civil society, churches, mosques, unions, and I think we're seeing student groups, and I think we're seeing movements among all of those. We just need more, because the bombs are still falling. So.
Yeah, and then last question, kind of the same stream of thought. How do we move forward? How does Gaza move forward? How does the world move forward?
Well, I think it was Edmund Burke, and then I think who said it, and then I think Edward Said quoted him and said, pessimism of the intellect, optimism of the will. And I which that really resonates with me. Unfortunately, I think the short term is bleak. I don't think that I'm not very hopeful in the short term in terms of what is. I think the best that is likely to happen is at some point there will be some form of ceasefire, at some point, but it should have already happened a long time ago. But that's going to come at some point. But in terms of beyond that, having some kind of just solution, I'm not optimistic that we're going to see that anytime soon. So I think that part of what that means for me is, that this is not the cause du jour. It's not the cause of the day that you just say, okay, well, I did that, check, I'm on to some other thing, because this is a long struggle, and I've been involved in this for over 20 years. So, because I think you have such an imbalance of power between Israel and the government and the Palestinians, especially those in Gaza. And there are a lot of ways in which it's not like South Africa. There are ways in which it is like South African apartheid, but there's also some significant ways in which it's not. And that may only prolong the issue. And so when you have that disparity in power, and then the Israeli public seems to be very united in terms of basically bomb Gaza to smithereens and just get rid of them however they can, send them away or whatever. So I think that disparity of power has to be addressed. And I think that was a problem with the Oslo peace process, is you had this disparity of power and it wasn't addressed, and so it just got enshrined into the peace negotiations and into the peace process. So that's why I think there needs to be pressure from outside. Israel is not, Martin Luther King Jr., in his famous letter from a Birmingham jail, he said, individuals might on their own choose to do the moral thing, but groups rarely do so. And so Israel is not just going to wake up and say, hey, we've decided to be just and to do the right thing and to, abide by. That's not going to happen. And so they have to be pressured. And that's what happened with South Africa. South African white government and people on the whole didn't just wake up one morning. They felt the pressure from the international community. And so I think that's what needs to happen. Unfortunately, I think that's a long game. And I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. And, my fear is that if there were any agreement between I don't know, the Palestinian Authority or what, some kind of Palestinian entity and Israel, it's only going to be very much in the interest of Israel. And so I don't know if that answers your question, but so here I think it means, talking about it, joining the BDS movement, and trying to bring about change in whichever groups that one is a part of. Going to protests. That's not everything. It's not. It may not even be much, but it's not nothing. And we got to do something because these are people they're people, period, and they're being killed they're being killed. Their killing is enabled by us. Even if we're not the ones actually pulling the trigger, it's happening because of us in a way, indirectly. So,
yeah, thank you for that. You're right. This is not an easy solution. It's not an easy topic. But I appreciate your time today. I don't have any further questions unless you just wanted to add anything about what your church is doing or the event specifically.
Well, I can speak a little bit about the event. On Friday night, we have a film. In this case, this is an unusual year in the sense that because of what's going on over there, basically all the films that we have are out of date. They're because there aren't films really that have been filmed in the last month or two. But we're showing one on Friday evening, Gaza Health Under Siege, which is about before October 7th. It's about the challenge of just providing healthcare in Gaza after years of blockade. The Darna restaurant is providing food on Saturday evening, and then we're going to show the film Israelism on Saturday evening, which is, I think, and then we're going to talk with the directors of that film virtually afterwards. And so, yeah, we want people to come. It's free. And, a lot of the people who we have come have come multiple times, and they're welcome. Ahlan wa sahlan. But we're particularly interested in people who are new to this issue, who kind of just only get their news from the mainstream media. Those are the ones we most are excited to have.
Well, thank you for joining us this week. From me and Maya, be sure to follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at American Muslim Today. And if you'd like to read more about this story and access more digital content, feel free to check out our website, AmericanMuslimToday.com. We'll see you next week on The Muslim Viewpoint.